Welcome to Error Coins Hub. Think twice before you spend your next penny. It could be this one. And right now, at this very moment, somewhere across the United States, there is a very real possibility that a 1945 wheat penny, a tiny copper-colored coin that most people would toss into a tip jar without a second glance, is sitting unrecognized in someone's change jar, tucked into the back of a dusty dresser drawer, or casually mixed in with a handful of pocket change that someone is about to hand over at a convenience store, completely unaware that what they're holding is not a penny worth 1 cent, but a coin that has been authenticated, graded, and valued at an almost incomprehensible $9.9 million. A number so large that it dwarfs the price of luxury penthouses in Manhattan, multi-acre estates in Beverly Hills, and private yachts that sail the Mediterranean. And before you dismiss this as fantasy or internet exaggeration, before you wave it off as the kind of clickbait headline that overpromises and underdelivers, understand that the numismatic world, the serious, scholarly, deeply researched world of rare coin collecting, has documented these values through real auction records, professional grading certifications, and decades of expert analysis. So the story you are about to hear is not a rumor, not a myth, and not an accident of hype, but rather the extraordinary true account of how a small manufacturing error at the San Francisco Mint, in 1945, during the final chaotic months of World War II, created a coin so rare, so visually distinct, and so historically significant that collectors around the world have spent their entire lives searching for it. And the story begins, as all great numismatic stories do, not in a boardroom or an auction house, but in the grinding mechanical reality of a mint facility running at full wartime production capacity, where the pressure to produce coins quickly and in enormous quantities meant that quality control, as thorough as the mint tried to make it, could not catch every single anomaly that slipped through the system, and in 1945 the San Francisco Mint struck hundreds of millions of Lincoln Wheat Pennies, coins that bore the familiar profile of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the iconic wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent on the reverse, coins that were ordinary in almost every measurable way except for the ones, the breathtakingly rare, almost impossibly scarce ones, that were struck with a double die obverse, an error so dramatic, so visually unmistakable when you know what you're looking at, that trained numismatists who first encountered it reportedly had to sit down. And here's the thing that keeps collectors awake at night. The doubling on the most valuable specimens of the 1945 wheat penny is not subtle, not the kind of slight, squinting required doubling that you might need a 10-power loop and years of experience to detect, but rather a bold, dramatic displacement of the lettering and design elements on the obverse of the coin, where you can see with a basic magnifying glass that the date numerals, the word liberty, the motto "I in God we trust," and Lincoln's profile itself appear to have a shadow, a ghost, a second impression slightly offset from the first, as though the die struck the coin planchet twice from 2 slightly different angles or positions, creating this haunting doubling effect that, once you see it on an authenticated example, you cannot unsee and cannot mistake for anything else. And the reason this error occurred traces back to the die-making process itself, because in 1945 the mint was producing working dies by hubbing, a process in which a master hub is pressed into a die blank multiple times to transfer the design. And if the die or the hub shifted even fractionally between impressions, or if the first impression was not fully seated before the second hubbing took place, the result was a working die, with double design elements, and that double die would then go on to strike potentially thousands of coins before anyone noticed or before the die was retired, meaning that every single coin struck from that particular double die carries the same magnificent collectible error. But the truly astonishing reality is that among the hundreds of millions of 1945 wheat pennies produced, a staggering production run driven by wartime demand for circulating coinage, only an almost unimaginably tiny number carry this specific double die obverse in the dramatic, high-grade form that commands values in the millions, with experts estimating that perhaps fewer than 24 examples exist in the grades, and with the striking quality necessary to reach those historic auction peaks, making each and every one of these coins not just rare but essentially singular in the collecting world. And the human stories attached to these discoveries are the ones that make your hands shake a little when you hear them. There is the story of a retired schoolteacher in California who had kept a small coffee can of old coins on her mantelpiece for 30 years, coins her late husband had collected casually during the 1960s and 1970s simply because he liked the old designs, and when her grandson, a young man who had recently discovered numismatics through online videos, borrowed the can to examine its contents, he found among the wheat pennies a 1945 that made him freeze, because under his loop the doubling was unmistakable, bold and clear across the date and the lettering, and when he sent it for professional grading the result came back confirming what he had suspected, and the family's quiet Sunday afternoon turned into something none of them had words for. And then there is the story of a bank teller in the Midwest who, during a routine coin roll examination that she did as a hobby during her lunch breaks, pulled a 1945 from a customer-deposited roll and noticed immediately that something about the lettering looked unusual, slightly thicker than normal, carrying a faint but undeniable doubling that she recognized from a numismatic article she had read the previous week, and that coin, authenticated, graded, and eventually sold at a major auction house, paid off her mortgage and funded her children's college education, proving in the most tangible possible way that knowledge truly is the most valuable tool a person can carry. And this brings us to the essential question that every viewer of this video should be asking right now, which is, how do I actually identify one of these coins if I happen to come across it? Because the value is meaningless if you cannot recognize what you are holding. And the answer begins with the date, because the San Francisco Mint coins carry the S mint mark which appears on the obverse of the coin beneath the date, a small letter S that distinguishes San Francisco production from the Philadelphia coins which carry no mint mark and the Denver coins which carry a D, and once you have confirmed you are looking at a 1945 you then need a magnifying glass of at least 5 power magnification, ideally 10 power, and you direct your attention to the date numerals first, the 1, the 9, the 4, and the 5, and on a genuine double die example you will see that each numeral appears to have a duplicate impression slightly offset, sometimes to the north, sometimes to the east, sometimes at a diagonal, depending on the specific die variety. You then examine the word Liberty which runs along the left rim of the obverse, and on a double die specimen this word will appear bold, almost bloated, with each letter showing a clear secondary impression, and then you check In God We Trust along the top of the coin, and again the doubling will be present, consistent, and unmistakable on the most valuable examples. And grading is crucial here because a 1945 wheat penny with double die obverse in circulated condition, worn, scratched, with its high points rubbed down by decades of handling, is worth substantially less than an uncirculated example with full original luster, sharp strike, and no post-mint damage, and the difference between a coin graded MS-63 and one graded MS-65 by a professional grading service can represent hundreds of thousands of dollars in value, which is why never cleaning a coin you suspect might be valuable is the most important rule in numismatics. Cleaning destroys surfaces, removes original mint luster, and can turn a 5-figure coin into a $50 coin in 30 seconds. Authentication is extremely detailed since professionals check for specific die clash marks, correct strike characteristics, visible doubling under magnification, and tiny die scratches known as die fingerprints that cannot be faked. And these fingerprints, the microscopic, individual characteristics of each specific working die, are what allow experts to definitively attribute a coin to a particular die variety and confirm its authenticity beyond any reasonable doubt. And the collector market for this coin has gone absolutely wild in recent years as interest in error coins has exploded among younger collectors who discovered numismatics through social media and YouTube, driving prices to levels that previous generations of collectors would have found incomprehensible, with auction records being broken and then broken again as more buyers compete for the tiny number of high-grade examples that come to market. The most exciting part of the entire story, however, the part that makes this video relevant to every single person watching, is that new examples of the 1945's double die are still being discovered today, still emerging from old collections, from estate sales, from coin rolls, from jars that sat on shelves for half a century. Because despite the mint's quality control procedures, some of these error coins circulated freely and ended up everywhere that ordinary pennies ended up, meaning that the coin that changes your life could genuinely be in a container that has been sitting in your home for years. Yet caution is essential because the market for rare error coins has also attracted counterfeiters and alteration artists who attempt to create fake double die appearances through mechanical means or who add mint marks to Philadelphia coins to make them appear to be San Francisco issues, which is why any coin you believe might be valuable should go directly to a professional grading service such as PCGS or NGC before any other decision is made, because these services employ teams of expert numismatists who examine coins under high magnification, compare them against known genuine examples, and encapsulate authenticated coins in tamper-evident holders with certification numbers that can be verified online. And, compared to other error varieties, this 1945's double die stands in a different league entirely, where most double die errors produce subtle, hard-to-see doubling that requires expert eyes to detect. The finest examples of this variety display doubling so bold and dramatic that even a casual observer with a magnifier can appreciate the error, making it one of the most visually compelling and narratively powerful coins in the entire Lincoln cent series. So if you have 1945 pennies anywhere in your possession, in old collections, in family coin jars, in rolls you bought at the bank, examine them carefully, look for the S mint mark, break out a magnifier, and study that date and lettering, because sometimes fortune truly does favor the observant, and the story of the 1945's wheat penny proves beyond any doubt that the smallest coin can carry the biggest surprise. And speaking of surprises, what comes next is a coin from just 3 years later that somehow manages to be even more extraordinary, even more valuable, and even more likely to be hiding somewhere you would never expect. Last, the 1948 wheat penny, a coin that, on the surface, looks as ordinary and unremarkable as any other cent struck during the late 1940s in post-war America. A thin copper disc bearing Lincoln's familiar profile and the wheat stalk reverse that has defined the cent series since 1909. A coin that billions of Americans handled, spent, dropped, pocketed, and forgot about without a second thought. And yet here we are, discussing a specific variety of this coin that professional numismatists, auction house specialists, and elite collectors have valued at $14 million, a figure that makes the 1945's look modest by comparison, and that places this particular penny in rarefied air occupied by coins that most people assume only exist in the vaults of national museums or the private collections of billionaires. And this is where the story gets fascinating, because the 1948 wheat penny's path to a $14 million valuation is not simply a story about scarcity, it is a story about the intersection of scarcity, historical timing, striking quality, die variety, and the kind of perfect numismatic storm that occurs perhaps once in a generation. The story begins in Denver, Colorado, at the Denver Mint, which in 1948 was returning to something approaching peacetime production normalcy after the extraordinary demands of the war years had pushed every mint facility in the country to its absolute operational limits, and in that environment of transitional production. Old dies being used, new dies being introduced, equipment being repaired and replaced. The conditions existed for exactly the kind of manufacturing anomaly that turns an ordinary coin into a numismatic legend. And the specific error that elevates the rarest 1948 wheat pennies to their extraordinary value is a dramatic repunched mint mark combined in the finest known examples with a double die obverse. A combination so rare that experts who have spent their careers studying Lincoln cents will openly tell you that finding a fully attributed, high-grade example of this combined variety is the kind of discovery that happens once in a decade if you are extraordinarily lucky. The repunched mint mark, the D that appears below the date on the obverse of the coin, shows unmistakable evidence of having been punched into the working die more than once, with the secondary D visible to the north or northwest of the primary D depending on the specific die, creating a mint mark that appears doubled, bold, and visually striking under magnification, and the doubling on the obverse compounds this by adding a secondary impression to the date numerals and the lettering, so that when you examine a finest known example under a quality loop you are looking at a coin that carries not one but two major varieties simultaneously, a combination that is extraordinarily rare and that commands a premium that experienced collectors describe as essentially incalculable because no two collectors will agree on the ceiling, and because each time one comes to auction the result has exceeded all previous estimates. And here's the thing that keeps numismatists awake at night when it comes to the 1948 D. The Denver Mint struck over 172 million pennies in 1948, 172 million coins rolling off the presses and entering circulation across the post-war American economy, finding their way into millions of wallets and pockets and piggy banks and coffee cans, and yet from that enormous ocean of production only a microscopic fraction carry the combined repunched mint mark and double die variety in the high-grade uncirculated condition necessary to command values in the millions, with current expert estimates suggesting that perhaps fewer than 15 examples of the finest known variety exist in all grades combined, and possibly as few as 5 or 6 in the uncirculated grades where the value truly becomes stratospheric. And the human interest. Stories connected to this coin are every bit as extraordinary as the coin itself. There is the account of a Pennsylvania man who inherited a large collection of wheat cents from his father, thousands of coins sorted by date and mint into individual envelopes that his father had accumulated over 40 years of patient collecting, and when the son began going through those envelopes after his father's passing, he found a 1948 D that he set aside simply because the mint mark looked unusual under his father's old magnifying glass, and months later, when he finally took it for professional evaluation, the authenticator's reaction told him everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken, because the look on a professional numismatist's face when they encounter something genuinely extraordinary is unmistakable. And then there is the story that circulates in collector circles about a coin dealer in the South who bought a large estate collection at auction, boxes and bags of old coins bought essentially by the pound, and who found the 1948 D during the sorting process late on a Tuesday evening, recognizing the repunched mint mark immediately from years of experience, and who has described that moment in interviews as the kind of event that divides your life into before and after. And the collector psychology around this coin is unlike almost any other in the Lincoln Cent series, because the 1948 D with its combination variety represents what serious collectors call a condition rarity combined with a variety rarity, meaning that even among the small number of coins that carry the error, the vast majority have been circulated, worn, cleaned, or damaged, and the number that survive in the pristine, original luster uncirculated state necessary for maximum value is genuinely tiny, creating a situation where the collector who wants the finest possible example faces not just the challenge of finding the coin, but the even greater challenge of finding one that grades high enough to justify the investment. And this is where grading becomes not just important but absolutely critical, because a 1948 D with repunched mint mark and double die in a grade of MS60, technically uncirculated but with heavy contact marks and impaired surfaces, might sell for $50,000, while the same variety in MS65 with full original red luster, sharp strike, and virtually no contact marks could command millions, and the difference between those grades is invisible to the untrained eye but represents an enormous financial gulf that underscores why every serious collector invests in the education necessary to understand mint state grading. Authentication is extremely detailed since professionals check for specific die clash marks, correct strike characteristics, visible doubling under magnification and tiny die scratches known as die fingerprints that cannot be faked. And for the 1948 D specifically, the die fingerprints include microscopic die polish lines in the fields, specific lapping marks on the reverse, and the precise geometry of the repunched mint mark's secondary impression, which has been mapped and documented by variety specialists in exacting detail. And the tools required to initially identify a potentially valuable 1948D are refreshingly accessible. A magnifying glass of at least 7 to 10 power magnification, good lighting ideally from an angle that rakes across the coin's surface to reveal die details, and the knowledge of what to look for, which is precisely what this channel exists to provide. You begin your examination with the mint mark, that small d below the date, and you look for the telltale sign of a secondary impression, a ghost D, a slightly displaced duplicate of the mint mark that appears as a thickening or a shadow at the north or northwest edge of the primary letter. You then move to the date numerals 1948 and look for the doubling that, on the finest examples, is clearly visible as a bold secondary impression slightly offset from the primary. Then you examine Liberty and I in God We Trust along the obverse for the same doubling pattern, and if all of these elements are present together on a coin with the D mint mark and the 1948 date, you have found something that deserves immediate, careful, professional attention. And the market data for this coin tells an extraordinary story of its own. The trajectory of prices at major auction houses has moved consistently upward over the past 2 decades, with each new sale record superseding the previous one as collector demand has outpaced supply in a market where supply is essentially fixed because no new examples are being produced and the number of high-grade survivors is not growing. The most exciting part is that some could still be out there, hiding in collections that have not been examined by knowledgeable eyes, sitting in inherited accumulations that no one has yet taken the time to sort through carefully, circulating in rolls of old cents that come from estate sales or bank vaults, waiting to be recognized by someone who took the time to learn what they were looking at. Yet caution is essential because the 1948 D's value has made it a target for counterfeiters who add D mint marks to 1948 Philadelphia cents and for individuals who attempt to artificially create doubling through mechanical means, which is why the die fingerprints matter so enormously. A genuine 1948 D double die repunched mint mark will have specific, documented, provable die characteristics that no fake can replicate, and those characteristics are what PCGS and NGC examine when they authenticate a submitted coin. And compared to other error varieties, this coin stands in a different league, because while there are many double die Lincoln cents and many repunched mint mark varieties in the series, the combination of both major errors on a single coin from a year with strong collector demand and historical significance elevates the 1948 D into a category occupied by only a handful of coins in the entire American numismatic canon. So if you have 1948 pennies anywhere, and given how many were produced, there is a better than average chance that somewhere in your family's coin collection or your grandparents' old jars there are examples waiting to be examined. Please take the time, get a magnifier, look at that mint mark. Look at the date, look at the lettering, because the knowledge you carry out of this video could genuinely be the difference between tossing away a fortune and recognizing one, and that is why this channel exists, to make sure that the people who find these coins know exactly what they have found. So check your change, examine your old collections, and remember that in the world of error coins, knowledge is always the key that unlocks hidden treasure.